Hey everyone. Today we're going to start with a really basic concept that a lot of ecology actually started with and is built upon, and that is the concept of the ecological niche. One of the key ideas in the field of ecology is trying to understand what is it that drives the distribution and abundance of organisms. And the idea of the niche is one of the key building blocks that helps us understand this. So what is the niche and how was this originally defined? Well, some important papers and studies came out at the turn of the last century, one by Joe Grinnell, that basically said that the niche, this idea of the niche, or the niche, if you will, the idea of the niche is synonymous with where an organism lives. You could think of this as another way of saying habitat. This is the place in which they occur, the physical location in the environment. Well, a different definition by Charles Elton in another really important work in the 1920s changed this idea a little bit, or redefined it to highlight the functional role that a species has in a community. So it's not just where it lives, it's actually what it does where it is. So it's a place in the biotic environment and the relationship to the food and to the enemies. And this idea of resources and competitors or predators is going to become really central as we develop further in this class. Okay, let's take another definition here. This is one by Hutchinson in 1957 that made it even more abstract. That is, that that the niche is a concept that is really an n-dimensional hypervolume. What this means is that each species is subject to a set of environmental variables, a whole range of them, x1, x2, x3, and you can put them kind of on an axis. Think of it like a Cartesian coordinate system, but now not with just 2 dimensions, not with just 3 dimensions, but with n different dimensions, where one of these dimensions might be temperature, another dimension might be precipitation, another dimension might be disturbance, all sorts of other things. And as you further and further define what the shape of this space is, what this environmental space is, species have ideal optima that they can actually exist in. It's funny that this quote actually still strikes a chord with a lot of ecologists, that most would agree that the niche is a central concept in ecology, even though we don't really know exactly what it means. In the textbook that you're using for your class, the Price et al. Text, they define the niche in an ecological way. That is, it's a role of a species in the environment, or the place in the environment which provides all of the needed resources for a species which enable it to survive and reproduce. So it's both the habitat, it's both where they are, and it's the constraints, the environmental constraints that it has on it, both biotic and abiotic constraints. And what I mean by biotic is things like the food availability and predators and diseases and things like that. So maybe we're back to square one. But I just want to give these to you just as an example of the key elements that go into forming this concept of the niche. And if we want to refine this a little bit further, maybe this is a little more nuanced way to look at it based on Hutchinson's idea. There's this concept of the fundamental niche, which is the total range of environmental conditions that are suitable for a species to survive. So all those places that it could survive, you could think of this as the limits of the environment that the physiology of the organism is able to tolerate and deal with, the physiological constraints. And this is different than the realized niche, which is where in this maximal physiological space that the species could occur in, is it actually present. And where it's actually present is smaller than the potential because of its interactions with other organisms, because of competition, because of predation, because of limitation by food and things like that. So you could think of the ecological niche as the smaller subset of all possible places in the environment where a species could actually exist. Now, insects, like all of us, are sensitive to their physical environment. And the forms and behaviors and exquisite diversity that we see in insects in the environment have been shaped by millennia of natural selection so that they can survive and persist. If they weren't able to do so, they would have been kicked out of the gene pool, so to speak. Those traits that don't allow them to survive have been selected out, and those traits that do allow them to persist have been maintained. And the suite of characteristics that an organism has is often referred to as the life history of that organism. This is, you could think of it as a schedule of the key aspects of an organism's life that determine how successful it's going to be. These are things like how fast does it reach maturity? How long does it spend in that larval or juvenile phase? When it gets to maturity, how many offspring does it have? How often does it reproduce? How long does it live, both in the adult and in all of the various stages? All of these traits confer trade-offs. You can't do everything. You can't get to maturity very quickly, have a ton of organisms, and live forever. These are things that are constrained by the biology, the physiology of the actual organism. And they're shaped by the context in which those organisms exist, by the physical conditions of the environment, by the food supply, by disturbance, by ephemerality, by unpredictability of resources, by predators, parasites, and so on. These are all forms of variation in the environment. And this variation applies selective pressure on these traits. So you could think of the life history as a solution to the problem of allocating limited time and resources to achieve reproductive success. So the ecological interactions that we see of insects in the environment are shaped by natural selection, and therefore the evolution of the organisms, both on short time scale and on longer time scales, are in part the response to the environment and its ability to adapt and take advantage of the environment.